Okay, hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. I'm here today with Scott Davalos in LA and Adrian Dewey in Phoenix, Arizona. And today we're going to be talking about the chakras. The title's The Chakras, a Practical Guide. Before we get started, happy Memorial Day to everybody. At some point during this podcast, and Scott and Adrian, don't let me forget, I want to probably at the end, if not sooner, I want to talk about Memorial Day a little bit. But back to the chakras, there's all sorts of things in the Vedic literature, and you can see pictures from the Vedic literature of the different chakras, and they're like mandalas, they're complex geometrical structures, and they have, Sanskrit letters etched all over them. And, all that is, of course, valid. That comes right from the rishis. It's all cognized. There's not much, unless you're a rishi yourself, I guess, there's not much practical daily life application to that sort of knowledge, even though it's great that we have it. But what we're going to talk today about is more the practical application. And a lot of people, I think the public in general, maybe, if they hear the word chakras, they're like, oh, they're not buying that, But the thing is, that's why one reason why I like to call the chakras psychophysiological centers. Just as an example, and we're going to go into each of the chakras front and back. We probably won't deal with the additional 7 chakras above the head, but we'll do the ones, again, that have more practical application to daily life. But back to psychophysiological centers, nobody ever says, if they fall in love, they never say, oh, my elbow is swelling in love. No, they say, my heart is swelling in love. They'll never say, oh, you broke my elbow. They say, oh, you broke my heart. Because there's a psychological correlate to different centers. And just a general picture is that and this is right out of the Veda, by the way, there are 3 types of centers. You could say there's the emotional centers, which are in the front. There's the intellectual centers, we're up in the head, mental centers, if you will. And then there's the willful centers along the back. And so every chakra has a front and a back. And so we'll go through them and we'll talk about their function, because why are we doing this? It has very practical application. In fact, people wouldn't say, oh, enliven the back of your 6th chakra, for example. They would say, put your nose to the grindstone. Or back of the 5th chakra, they would say, oh, that's a pain in the neck. Or all the chakras. There's so many slang terms that we use to describe the practical daily application of the knowledge of the chakras. But, if so many people, if you were to say that to them, they say, oh, it's just ridiculous. These are just slang terms. But where did they come from? Why did they come from there? My heart is swelling in love. It's because the psychophysiological centers, the physiological and psychological correlate to the centers on those levels of existence are real. And just like, for example, too, energy is real. A lot of people are like, oh, there's no such thing as energy, human energy, and all like that. But the thing is, we're living that every day of our lives. That's why it's impolite to point your finger in somebody's face, because they can feel it. It doesn't matter if you can measure energy coming out the tip of your finger. That's not what it's about. We're talking about psychodynamics, psychophysiological energy. And it's real on its own level. And so once you get an understanding and a feeling for the different chakras and how they function and their psychophysiological correlate, It can have tremendous value. For one, because the chakras, even though they're energetic, they're deeper in the physiology. They have correlates all the way out to the surface of our physiology, even our physicality. We have a tendency where we hold our chakras a certain way. That comes from early childhood, and generally speaking, people maintain that throughout their life. And a result of that, the body, the physical body, kind of grows around it. So you can get insight into how somebody tends to hold a particular chakra based upon the conformation of their physical body. And so if you start to understand that, for example, the front of the heart chakra is feelings, emotion, relationship with people. And the back of the heart chakra is the will center, right? So it has to do with willfulness. And if somebody's walking around then with a caved in chest and kind of a bulging back, which you'll see a lot, you can start to get some insight into the nature of what's going on. They've been hurt. There's somewhere in there, there's emotional hurt. And so that what they do to compensate is they kind of will their way through life. So there's so much practical application. And then also from a healing perspective, there's so much that can be done if a person learns how to work with the chakras. And it's not some otherworldish kind of new age, if you will, thing. You know, working with chakras isn't about closing your eyes or fluttering your eyelids or looking to heaven and feeling into this. No. It's real world. It's practical. That's the level to interface with the chakras on if you're going to do anything that's really pragmatic and real world. Now, when it comes to that, by and large, I would have to say that the way that people work with chakras, we would say energy healers, if you will, is oftentimes very inappropriate. In other words, they will go in, just as an example, and try to pry open a chakra. They'll take their finger in there and drill into the third eye, for example. And when that is done, yeah, okay, all of a sudden this light starts flooding in, you start seeing all this stuff, and you think, oh, that was a great healing. All this energy starts pouring in. But the thing is, the chakras aren't supposed to detonate. They're not supposed to be ripped open. They're supposed to blossom. And the damage that can be done to the chakras by doing these sort of invasive techniques, which are very common, what it says in the Vedic literature, it can take lifetimes to heal those kind of things. And I'm saying this because it's important, there's a difference between facilitating the natural self-correcting mechanism. Like what a doctor doesn't heal the cut heals itself, but the doctor can facilitate the process. Like that, you can facilitate the healing of a chakra, but not by going in there and ripping it apart. Now, I've said this in lectures. People have heard it and they're like, oh yeah, I would never let anybody do that. But I'll tell you what, and be careful, because if you go to somebody like that and they rip open your third eye and all of a sudden all this light starts flooding in and you think you've got all these psychic perceptions, it's enticing, it's alluring. All of a sudden you think you just got a great healing, but what you just got is your chakras torn open. Okay, so that's just a word to the wise. Now, how do you go about healing chakras? Well, to give a simple example, if you come home at the end of the day and it's been a busy, rough day and you plop down on the couch and like, oh man, and a loved one comes up and puts their hand on your shoulder and says, oh, you had a rough day. There's something to that touch that is just naturally healing. If they were to take a telephone book and set it on your shoulder, it would not do the same thing. So the point is, there is something to human touch, and that quality, call it energy if you want, but whatever it is, that quality facilitates a healing if it's done wisely, if it's done properly, if it's done non-invasively. In fact, I would also say that by and large, one of the obstacles to doing that is that as a society, we've really lost our ability to feel. I think an extreme example, a great example, is in Western medicine, allopathic medicine. There used to be a skill that was developed by doctors called palpation, where you can go in with your hands and you can feel into the abdomen. If you develop the art sufficiently, you can even feel the quality of the brain waves, you can do EEG with the hands, but that's a little advanced. But also auscultation, listening with a stethoscope and hearing what's going on with the heart. But that skill, it's still popular in veterinary medicine. I'm a veterinarian, so we did it all the time. But in Western medicine, it's becoming more and more out of favor. Why? Because you can't prove it. You don't have an MRI or whatever test, objective test confirms it. And so if you go with those skills, you can end up getting sued. There can be a lawsuit against you. Why did you do this and prescribe that medicine when there's no verifiable proof that what you're feeling is correct? So we've lost in general the ability to feel. We tend to override it with our minds. We tend to override it with our intellect. We tend to override it with our preconceived notions, our programming, our intellectualizations about who a person is, what they are. We all have our different models, and we cling to those models more than we cling to our ability to feel. Now, I remember I had a hands-on healing school for years. I teach people, and it was amazing how, just an example, you might have somebody put their hand over the third chakra, for example, of a patient, a client, and they put their hand on their client's third chakra, solar plexus area, and then I'd say to them, well, what do you feel? And they were, nothing, and I'd say, well, and so you kind of help them. You say, well, if you had to say between soft and hard, what would you say? And they might say hard, and say, okay, fine. And then just let them feel that. And then you might say, well, hard, what does that mean? Does it mean, if you had to assign an emotion to it, would you say it's afraid, and so it's kind of defensive? Or would you say it's angry and aggressive? And so slowly then they start to get what? The psycho-physiological connection. And what they're doing is they're learning to feel. They're cultivating the ability to feel. I remember when I was in vet school, when I was first learning the ability to feel, palpate, I put my hand on a dog or a cat's abdomen and feel into. I couldn't feel anything. I mean, it was just a bag of mush, And so, like any learning process, it's very common if you're learning to play the guitar or whatever, there's a tendency, I'll never be able to do this. Well, one evening I was studying. I used to sit on the floor in my bedroom when I was in college. I had a room that I rented in an old house, and I had cats, and they had free reign of the house. We were all friends who rented the house together. And the cats would love it when I studied. When I sat on the floor to study, they'd come running. They somehow sense it and come running up the steps or whatever. And they'd come running right at me. And then right before they got to me, they'd do like this flop, and just boom, right there in front of me, wanting me to pet them. And I would. And so one time I was doing that, and I just decided I'd try to palpate. And you know what? First thing, I could feel kidneys are pretty easy. I could feel the kidneys. And once I did that, I got into the zone. You know, I started to get an idea of how to feel. And so once I felt the kidneys, it was easy. I think all in the same 15-minute period, I knew where to go, you know, so I could feel the intestines, I could feel stomach, liver, all of that. All that can be palpated, you know, and you get a tremendous amount of information, more information than you get. Not that the SMA-12, for example, or blood screening isn't good. It is, it's important. But using those in conjunction with one another, you get a tremendous more amount of information. I remember years later when I had my vet practice in Florida, part of my routine exam, somebody bring a dog or a cat in, and I, you know, check the eyes, look at the gums, look at the teeth, palpate the abdomen. It just takes a second because you get good at it. And I remember somebody brought a dog as a big old poodle, and they set him on the table, you know, and so I did that in my exam. And I put my hand on the abdomen and reached up in there, and I said, the stomach feels good, liver feels good, you know, kidneys, you know, pancreas, whatever, all feels good. And then I looked up because I was kind of down there doing that. It just took a second. Routine exam. I did it all day long, every day. And then I looked up, and the owner was looking at me and kind of making a face and shaking their head. And they say, I know you can't do that. He said, you don't need to pretend like you can do that for my benefit. I was kind of taken aback. I was, I think, 26 years old at the time or something. I said, they taught me how to do that in vet school, you know. But the point being that you can cultivate these abilities, but you start with the gross physical. All too often, people, if they want to perceive chakras, they try to go otherworldish with it. No, you start with what you can feel, and then you work slowly, go deeper, deeper, deeper. All too often people try to start at the depth, and that just, it doesn't work. I used to say, if you can't tell the difference, if you don't know what coffee tastes like, there's no way you're going to have the ability to tell if it's Colombian or Costa Rican coffee. It's a more subtle perception, you know, and it's something that's cultivated over time. And it's the same with feeling chakras, you know. I really want to emphasize again, we don't drill chakras open. We don't pry them open. You can really damage chakras by doing that. On the other hand, just set a hand on somebody's shoulder. Oh, it feels good. And if you learn how to do it properly, you can do the same thing with the different chakras. Oftentimes, though, the chakras are so delicate, you might put a hand in the proximity of the chakras without actually going right over it. Okay? So anything to add, Scott, Adrian? You guys have studied with me for years. You're well versed in all of this. Otherwise, I'm going to go on to talking about what each chakra is and its psychophysiological function.
Is there anything anybody can do to just, like, you know, we talked about if not if like you're healing a chakra, but just like maintaining its healthiness, or, you know, or the chakras, or is there anything that you could give?
Well, I think largely just having this awareness, because when you have this awareness, then you can start even with your own self and also your loved ones and that, or strangers even. You start to perceive it. And what I used to say, if you can feel it, you can heal it, or the feeling is the healing, you know? And so by doing this, see what happens is that it starts just by, is it harder or is it soft? And then what psychological, psychodynamic correlate to that? Is it hard angry or is it hard afraid, you know? And then what happens though, especially since the body conforms to it, the shape of the body, but it gets even more subtle than that, because it's almost like you start to feel it with your eyes. You've done it so much that you look at somebody, and just by looking at the heart chakra, for example, you can feel, you know, what's going on. There's one psychodynamic type where people hold all their chakras perfectly. Well, we call that rigid, but if you start to get a feeling for it, you realize that it's not about chakras being open all the time. It's about, because they're supposed to open and close. It's more about they're rigid. They have to be perfect. They've been brought up from childhood that you got to be perfect. And so they even get to the point where they're holding everything perfectly, but it's unnatural. There's a tension there, you see. And all these things you can start to perceive. And when you do that, you start to understand. It's not overstand. You're not looking down upon them, but you start to understand people. And understanding another and interfacing with them from that perspective goes a huge way toward helping people, helping them heal, helping them in their relationships, helping them in life. But if you use it to overstand and, oh, you're too rigid, you got to loosen up. No. That's not understanding. That's overstanding, you see. Is that responsive, Scotty?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was talking with somebody the other day that works with me, and she was just talking about how it'd been a long day, and it's just her like back was just like a rock, from all that. And I was like, I talked to her about meditating. I'd never talked to her about that before, and having that physical, emotional connection where most of the time people don't even notice it's happening, right?
Yeah, for sure. They don't even think about it. But,
so,
what do we say about the back will centers? So how many people hold their backs tight? Because we have been indoctrinated into willing our way through life instead of feeling our way through life. It's a good example, Scotty.
Yeah, and it goes for all the rest of them too. They get a stomach ache, when they're, or whatever it is,
That's right. That's exactly right.
They just start to understand the connection. Maybe.
Yeah. That's right. So let's start with the chakras. Now we'll go through them each one by one. Okay. First chakra is the crown chakra. Comes right out the top of the head, and it relates to our spiritual connection, our connection with what's above. But one place where that gets misunderstood, and I've seen people do this, they want to open their connection to spirituality, so they kind of go around like this, and they're trying to open their head. If you think about it, if you're just, again, natural about it, and all this is natural, you see, and you see it on Sunday morning TV, in the churches, people don't try to open to heaven like that. They open like this. So the dynamic of opening to what's above, and this also relates when we get down to the first and second chakra and connecting to the earth, but it's a interplay between the front of the sixth chakra and then the crown chakra, and that's how we open to heaven. Now, there's so much I could say about each of these chakras, but you see I'll just say one more thing. The crown chakra has got all these different petals. They're like flowers. And there's an intricate interaction between all those petals. And so because the crown chakra has so many petals, never let anybody stick their finger into any of your chakras, but particularly the crown chakra. Because what happens, you see, there are different models for the chakras, and some of them don't even talk about the petals as petals. They might call them something else, or they might even be in complete denial of them. But the thing is, that is the interplay between those petals becomes very delicate. And by sticking a finger in there, oftentimes you can get things stuck together, get petals stuck together, and you just made a mess out of the chakras. But not uncommon that you do that to somebody. Oh, wow, I can, I'm so connected to what's above, but it's at a great cost, and it's just a distortion that's going to have to get healed, Okay, front of the sixth chakra, you can call it the third eye, but also it's a mental center, right? These are all, and so it has to do with our ability to perceive, our ability to understand, our ability to know. If you're studying a whole lot, to get to the slang of it, if you're studying a whole lot, you can get a headache. Why? Because you've been overworking the front of the third eye. The back of the sixth chakra, the seventh chakra, this is the sixth chakra. The back of the sixth chakra has to do with actualizing, making things happen. It's a will center. And thusly, the expression, put your nose to the grindstone. Why? Because you're focusing and you're willfully moving forward. Put your nose to the grindstone. Fifth chakra, front of the fifth chakra has to do with giving and receiving nourishment, be it actual food or speech, support, you know. And of course, if it's twisted or messed up, it can be harsh, you know. Quick story. There was a lady that came to me when I had my hands-on healing practice. She was a famous channel. And I tell people, don't channel. And I could get, that's a whole other thing. Sorry to open up a bag of worms without going deeper into it. But at any rate, she was lying on the table. You develop your ability to feel. I put my hand, I didn't even touch her throat. I just put my hand, I could feel it. And I could tell that there was something going there and going up and kind of twisted. So she had this whole thing all twisted and going up. And so I put my hand over where it was, which is not where it's supposed to be really, but put my hand over where it was. And I said, where do you bring in your channel? She was lying on the table with her eyes closed. She reached up and touched my hand. And so she was tweaking her physiology in order to bring in these guides, you know. So I said, well, she's here for healing. So I healed it. She never came back, but she sent everybody to me. And I guess after I healed that, she was in bed for several days. But she had fame, she had a livelihood, and so she stuck with it. Back of the fifth chakra. Back of the fifth chakra has to do with, again, will, and as it relates to people, to society. So that's why they call the Marines leathernecks, you know, because they're forcing their way through that. You know what? I got somebody at the door. Scott and Adrian, you guys can take over. I'll be right back.
Scotty, you have anything to add?
No, it's interesting. You know, we talk about like physical proof. I remember going through, and we were working on this, you know, the chakra things where they put the pendulums in. Do you remember that?
I do.
Ava?
I do.
And I was like, I'd never seen that before. And it's like, holy smokes, you put it over there and these things actually start spinning.
Yes.
You know,
yeah, where you take the pendulum and you kind of dip it in the energy kind of above the chakra.
Right.
And then the pendulum starts doing something. Yeah.
Right.
It was fascinating. I'd never seen that either.
Yeah. And just really getting the understanding, because I remember him talking about the right hand rule where whatever way your thumb is pointed, the energy is spinning the way your fingers are pointed.
Yeah.
And so you can tell whether the chakras are taking in energy,
yeah,
or they're releasing it,
or releasing energy. And you know, that concept of the fact that they're not supposed to say the same. You know, when somebody says something that hurts you, your heart's gonna retract and close down in protection. Yeah. And when you're feeling safe with someone, that heart chakra is going to open up and relax. And so it's not supposed to be spinning the same way. It's not supposed to be a certain color. You know, it changes from moment to moment with our thought or interaction.
That's right.
Yeah. We were talking about the pendulum thing where you kind of actually, you know, we were talking about there's no physical proof. And I was like, wait a second. I remember seeing some physical proof where we put those pendulums above the chakras. And then they start spinning. So anyway.
Yeah. That was mind blowing. First time we saw that.
Yeah.
And in a way, I don't care if there's physical proof or not. I mean, I don't mean to negate what you're saying. You're right. But at the same time, the fact that it works, that it heals, and there's such a correlation between state of psyche, state of physiology,
Yeah.
Because, if somebody's got a really blocked heart chakra and it's really tight, and you put your hand on it and just feel it, and it's kind of like a vault or a vice or something, that's unhealthy, and that can lead to a heart attack. There are all kinds of dynamics that you can identify. And the energy flows up and down, connects them through the Sushumna, the Ida Pingala, the vertical energy dynamic, And so what affects one can cascade down and affect another. That's why oftentimes lower back pain, for example, can be difficult to diagnose, because it's not necessarily the back of, the second chakra. It can be a tension in the neck I used to compare it to like a hose. If you take a hose and you swing it, and the wave goes down, but if you got it locked somewhere, it all bounces right back at you. And that can happen too. And if you got a tight block in the neck, it can have an effect on the lower back, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's so much to say about it. And I'll tell you, it becomes so fascinating when you develop the ability to feel, and you can feel so much about a person's subtle physiology just by learning to feel. It's really a matter of feeling. I remember I was healing all kinds of things. Got well known for a while there. I can't believe I did this. But for a while there, I was backed up 2 years in advance with appointments. I got well known. And then I remember people would, I'd be booked solid, and then people would call. What do you say to a woman if she's calling you on the phone crying, "Oh, my daughter," like that? And so I'd see them too, and it just got to be too much. And so then I realized that I just needed to start a school, because I knew so much that I wanted to share it. And I actually thought about writing a book, an encyclopedia of how to heal this, how to heal that. But I realized how ridiculous that was, because to be able to do those techniques I would teach in the book, a person would have to be able to feel it. And if they can feel it, then they wouldn't need the book, because they would know it just through feeling. And so I ended up closing the school, because I realized that first thing has to happen is people have to get established in their own being. Just rest in your own being, beyond identity, beyond preconceived notions, beyond notions of what you think you are, what you think you should be, what's true, what's not, just state of being. That's step one. And then from that comes merging. Once you can establish in your own being, only then can you really merge with another, because otherwise it's all based on superficial preconceived programmings and identities, So being goes to merging. And then from merging, if you can really merge with somebody, really feel what's there, then there becomes a spontaneous knowing. You start to know, you start to understand. So being, merging, knowing, and only after that do you know what to do. So being, merging, knowing, and doing, is the process. Whereas in a hands-on healing school or any kind of school, people aren't interested in that. They want to do. Teach me new techniques. Tell me how to do it. It's all upside down. So that's when I shifted over to really a more of a spiritual orientation, teaching people how to be. Because once you get established in being, then follows merging, knowing, and doing. So the other way it's upside down, It's fine if you're trying to fix a car or something, you can learn how to do it. But in these subtle arenas of life, and it's all an interaction between you and other people, being has to come first, for sure. So let's see, where were we? Oh, front of the heart chakra, connections. Yeah, okay, with other people, love, whatever, blocking your heart, whatever. Now, the back of the heart chakra, between the shoulder blades, it's a will center. All the back chakras are will centers. And a lot of times people think of that as, alignment of your will with God's will. Well, there's truth to that, but I think it's more misleading than anything. Because, see, really, ultimately, you are one with God, right? And so ultimately, your will is one with God's will. So I think it's more practical understanding is to say it has to do with the alignment of your will in life with your own true nature. And, when you get involved in all the preconceived notions and the programmings and, I should do this, I should be this way, this has to happen, I need, this, or I need, you lose touch with your own true nature, your own divine will, God's will, if you will. Now, just a word on God's will, it's not completely simplistic. If you get a bunch of people in the same room and they're all living in harmony with God's will, say, they're not all going to think the same, because God's will functions through different people in different ways. So it's not like, oh, they'll all be in total agreement with everything, but they all will be living in harmony with God's will. Does that make sense? Okay.
And that was the fourth chakra, the heart.
That's the back of the fourth chakra, the heart, between the shoulder blades. And how many people have tightness there? Well,
Yeah.
how many
Seems
people
like
are
everybody.
really living in harmony with their true nature? I was, I don't know how I stumbled upon it, but that thing about Bruce Lee, and there's that famous black and white interview that he did, back in '77 or whenever it was. And he said a thing in there about basically being true to yourself. And he was saying how that's not so easy to do. And I remember, yeah, what do you mean it's not so easy to do? You're being true to what you feel, what you think. But it came to my mind recently in another way. And it was like, yeah, man. Because we have so many, again, notions of what we're supposed to be like, how we're supposed to be, what a marriage is supposed to be like, for example. And we cling to that notion when it's not consistent with our own true natures. I know a guy, a great guy, and he's married. And he and his wife, they love each other, but they just couldn't live together. So what they ended up doing is buying two houses adjacent, and they get along great, and they love each other, and they have, certainly arguably from their perspective, a wonderful marriage. So again, that doesn't really conform to the preconceived notion of what it's supposed to be like. So it's not so easy to do, because there are so many pressures, so many conditionings, so many preconceived notions that kind of get in the way of who it is we really are and how to really live true to your own self, And all that relates to the will center, the back of the heart chakra, doesn't it? Aligning your will with your own true nature. Okay. Third chakra, front of the third chakra, solar plexus. That relates to how you kind of relates to your relationship, we could say, with your parents, your childhood, your growing up. And then, of course, that maps onto your whole life. Psychotherapists will tell you that the nature of the human psyche is developed really in the first 5 years. And it doesn't change all that much. And the rest of what we do is basically a dance we do around it. Now, some people hear that, oh no, I have all these issues from childhood. Trees aren't supposed to grow out of the ground like 2x4s, the twists and the bends are there, they're beautiful. And you can have a tree with all kinds of twists and bends, but still be healthy. And so that's what it's about. Swami Muktananda, I believe it was, said that you can spend your life working on self-improvement, but if you do that, all you have to show at the end of your life is an improved self. Now, what's he talking about there? He's talking about improve from the perspective of your own conditioning, preconceived notion, identities, and indoctrinations. You see? So again, like Bruce Lee said, it's not so easy to do. Yeah. Back of the third chakra, well, it's the ability to take care of yourself, really. I mean, if you have a hard time taking care of yourself, that back of the third chakra, it becomes weak, Second chakra, front of the second chakra, lower abdomen. It's a sensuous center, right? Belly dancers, people that kind of just dancers. They have just a natural, healthy flow through there. It's a sensuous center. The back of the second chakra has to do with your power. Are you manifesting your power? Is your power flowing through you freely. So they see there's a play between the front and the back of the second, and all the chakras, front and back. But there's another important thing about the second chakra, and that's how it relates to the first chakra. The first chakra kind of, you can look at it different ways, but best to look at it from the perspective it has to do with your connection to the earth. Horse stance, if you're familiar with that in martial arts, kung fu, Ji Kung. But now, think about it. I talked about how the crown chakra in the front of the six are an interplay for connection to spirituality. Well, there's a mirror image to that, right? The connection to the earth isn't just the first chakra. You don't walk around like that to connect to earth. If you're going to roll a big boulder, a big snowball, if you're building a snowman, you bend forward and roll it, and you're using the back of the second and the first as an interplay. And that's where your power comes from. And so it's important to keep that in mind for the front of the sixth, crown, and also first chakra and back of the second. Anything else, you guys, about all this? I think that's pretty much a good overview. I mean, I spent years teaching this stuff, and so this is just a basic overview, but I think it's important. And if I was to say one thing, just to emphasize it, because it's so important, just because somebody goes there and drills open your third eye and you start seeing all these lights and colors and all this energy starts pouring in, doesn't mean it's a good thing. The chakras, I used to say, they're supposed to blossom. They're not supposed to detonate. Okay? Don't forget. And
you also used to say, that you're not supposed to do some formulated healing method on them. Make one of them go right, and the next one should go left, and one should be a certain color. Right. It's really about just putting your hand on them and feeling, like you said, the feeling is the healing. Just feeling what's under there, and the self-correcting mechanism will kick on.
That's exactly right. There are so many different models for chakras. Some say they're cones and vortices. Others say that a particular chakra is a certain color. Another book will say they're a different color. And that's because it's multidimensional. I've talked about how we have the transgradient reality. On the deeper levels of existence, you and I are one. On the more superficial levels of existence, you and I are separate. I'm me, you're you. People get confused. There's a whole thing there, cross-realm projection, where they take the principles of one level and try to apply it in another. It's like walking down a dark alley in the middle of downtown Manhattan at 2:00 in the morning, saying, well, I'm one with everything, you'll get mugged. Or just because you're one on a transcendental level with everything doesn't mean you're, going to hug sewage, you know what I mean? So there's that whole thing. But there's also, and I've talked about the vertical, but it also exists in the horizontal. So chakras, depending on the reality continuum and how you align with it, not just vertically from we're all one to we're all separate, to the horizontal, where one perspective, the chakras are cones and vortices. Another perspective, they're lotus flowers. I knew a great healer, Chinese doctor, world famous. He and I became close friends. He was an old man. He passed away now. Dr. John Shen. I just loved him, And I asked him about chakras once. He said, no such thing. It's not about the model you use. It's about your relationship with the model. He had a very healthy relationship with the model that he used, and he was awesome. He was an awesome healer. So it's not the thing, and we're going to generalize it. It's not the thing. It's more about your relationship with the thing, and that applies to all things. Okay? All right, I think that's enough for today. What do you guys think? Scott, Adrian?
Sounds good.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk again next week. You take care, and we appreciate feedback, by the way. If you go to michaelmamas.net and search around a little bit, you'll see how you can make comments or questions or things, and those are all very much appreciated. So please feel free. All right. Thank you. And also, if you have things you want me to talk about, I used to do this thing in my classes, call it Ask Me Anything. And that wasn't because I was trying to be a performer or anything, but it's because the point is this knowledge relates to everything. And I think people gain insight if they start to see that it's not about some cookbook lecture I put together, but it's about anything. And once you're established in that level that connects all things, you can talk about anything, just that simple. Okay, thanks for listening. And we'll talk to you again next week on Ancient Secrets Revealed.